Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jim Guthrie. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel today. Governor Bush admonished us to eat our broccoli. There could be no more bitter piece of broccoli than education finance. What's new about all of this, though, is that today, in contrast to 50 years ago when I was a classroom teacher, what's different about this is an understanding that the flow of resources actually can guide what we do in education. And that I suppose if you dropped in from Mars and you looked at school district budgets, you would have virtually no idea of what this thing was set up to accomplish. So today we're going to dive pretty deeply into education finance, and my colleagues, Hanna, Skandera, and Senator Don Gaetz, we bring to you some real-world experiences that I'm sure will prove valuable here. Let me begin with something with which you are familiar, even if not many of us could explain it. Of course, this is the Einstein theory of relativity, which gives guidance to the manner in which the universe comes together. I've taken a liberty to adopt this. Learning equals MCAP. Stands for motivation, capacity, access, and prior knowledge. All of these are mediated by culture without question. What I wanted to point out to you about this, and I'll return to it at the end of my remarks, which are going to take about 10 minutes, and we'll turn to our other colleagues up here. What's interesting about this equation is that you can fulfill it without ever referring to something called a school. Virtually every part of this is possible to maximize, or at least to optimize, by skirting around or scooting around or avoiding anything called a school. I don't think schools are going to disappear. I think for the young students, certainly we have a custodial function which society expects us to perform. And I think even for secondary school students, parents and citizens expect there to be schools. So I don't think they're going to disappear for a moment, and I think in every way we should make them as effective as we can. But almost assuredly, as I hope to point out, they're not going to be effective unless we integrate new digital technology into the instruction of our students. The most important thing I think we're all concerned about is student achievement. If we had high levels of achievement, and we don't, but if we did, so many other good things would fall into place. The Hoover Institute economist Rick Hanna has made it clear in recent analyses that if we could just elevate American student achievement, not to the level of Finland, which outranks all the other nations in the PISA test. We don't have to match Finland, although that would be dramatic and good. If we could just match Canada, which is nearby, and something in a way to which we can relate. If we could match the achievement of Canada, it adds literally trillions of dollars to our annual gross domestic product, and of course makes other individuals' lives more fulfilled, etc. So if we could get achievement, that's what we want. And the problem today is that it's not as high as we would like. Here is a plotting of NAEP scores for the 4th, 8th, and 12th grades. Because I've taken so many years here, it actually sort of distorts it. There have been some gains over time. Mostly these lines are flat, as you could see. In reading and math, the lines are flat. But that is something of an exaggeration. When you look carefully at mathematics, there have been some gains over the last 20 years, particularly for African American and Hispanic students. Mathematics scores have gone up in a way that is statistically significant. But for the nation as a whole, these lines are pretty flat. This slide, which is a crazy, distorted mosaic, has various measures of graduation rates, but it doesn't matter which one you take. Graduation for the last 30 years has been almost flat at approximately 70% across the nation graduating from high school. We can go further. All of you sitting here are familiar with PISA scores in science and mathematics, where the United States scores below the OECD mean, and in some instances very close to the bottom of all nations. So we do a little better in science than mathematics. But the point here is we don't have the achievement we want. Virtually everyone would agree to that. Where it starts to fall apart is what the problem, why don't we? What can explain it? But if we had it, it'd be a better world for us. Here is a tracing of per-pupil expenditures over the last century. Often you hear that if the schools just had more money, they could do it all better and achievement would be higher. Possibly, though frankly, as a former school board president in Berkeley, California, I doubt it. We spent more money than we could ever even keep track of. As a matter of fact, one of my campaign platforms was that within 25%, plus or minus 25%, we ought to know how we were spending the money, which was taken to be a radical idea. And I was propelled into office with 35,000 more votes than the mayor had, and thus I thought my political career was launched and I'd be in the White House just any minute. What I didn't understand is that by virtue of being elected to office in Berkeley, I'd guaranteed I'd never hold office anywhere else in the United States. And when you look at school per-pupil spending nationwide, now there are going to be exceptions from state to state and certainly from locality to locality. But when you look at per-pupil spending adjusted for inflation nationwide, there have only been 2 times in the last century where year over year per-pupil spending didn't increase. There were 2 years in the Great Depression when it was stagnant, and 2 years in World War II when it was stagnant. But otherwise, I'm not here to say that we spend enough. I'm only here to say that as a nation, we have made a tremendous commitment to funding our schools. As Governor Bush said earlier this morning, there is no nation that in the aggregate spends more on its schools, and there's only one nation that on a per-pupil basis spends more than we do, and that's Switzerland. And yet our achievement doesn't begin to match these. So money, again, I don't know if we spend enough, though I suspect we do, but I know we have spent a lot and for a long time and in a sustained way. Mostly what this money's gone for over time is more and more people. There are few things more labor intense in our society than are our public schools. And over the last quarter of a century, the number of students per professional, I'm not talking about class size, though I could, but the number of students per professional has almost dropped in half, from 28 to 1 some 25, 30 years ago to about 15 to 1 today. If you look at all employees in America's public schools, the ratio is one employee for every 7 students. In contrast to productivity in every other segment of our society, there may be some people in this room old enough to remember when there were telephone operators. I'm here to tell you they used to have them. That was something that was there. And today all the switching, of course, is digital. And you think about what the Federal Reserve regional clearinghouses used to do by hand sorting all the checks, which today you couldn't begin to do. So in communication, in finance, in manufacturing, in transportation, particularly in agriculture, productivity has soared in the United States. Here's your stunning statistic for the morning. There are more classroom teachers in the United States today than those who are directly engaged in agriculture. We feed ourselves with fewer people than we school ourselves. That might be good if all of those who were doing the schooling were effective. So in every other segment of our life, productivity has accelerated. Here, with my colleague Elizabeth Edema sitting up front here, what we've done is we've determined the cost of 1 standardized point of the National Assessment of Educational Progress scores. We've taken one standardized point. What has it begun to cost over time to achieve that point? And if that's our measure of productivity, how many teacher hours is it taking to get an NAEP point? You can see we've put these on a scale which makes them go down because that's the point we wanted to show. Productivity in education isn't level. It doesn't begin to match what happens in other sectors. It's actually going down. Now, I don't think there is a solution to this in the long run that avoids digital technology. That's where it's got to happen. We're not going to get more productivity. We're unlikely to get the high levels of achievement that we want unless we begin systematically to weave technology forcefully into this equation. And I know that it's resisted in many ways, and we can overcome it. I think you're probably familiar with Clayton Christensen's Disrupting Class and his fundamental thesis that new technologies will overcome old businesses and transform them. How can this happen in schools? We'll turn to our colleagues here from the Senate and a Chief State School Officer in just a moment. But I think it has to happen in unusual ways on the periphery. It's the rural school district that uses online instruction and virtual schools. It's going to be using summer schools where teachers, or at least their leaders, feel less threatened by the use of technology in those instances. It may even be in smug suburban school districts that actually don't do as well as they think they do, but they can't risk lowering the capital value of their real estate by admitting that they're not doing well. But even in our smug suburbs, from time to time, one can see the inroad that technology will make. But whereas technology, I believe, is the ultimate or the longer run answer, in the shorter run, there are things that you as executive branch and legislative branch officials can do. I just put a few up here to illustrate it. You can save some money. The point isn't to spend less, in my judgment. It's not to spend less, it's to spend what you have more wisely. We make no case that schools should be cut. We only ask that every dollar they have be used effectively. And there are so many areas in which precedent, inertia, history is dictating what we continue to do that increasingly we understand is not productive. Like paying teachers a premium every year for a master's degree outside one's subject matter field. I understand well the economic dynamics, the financial dynamics of what ed schools need and what school districts pay and all that sort of thing. But giving a math teacher a master's degree in educational administration is very unlikely to propel student achievement higher. It just doesn't make any sense. And while we're at it, most of you probably understand that the premium we pay for experience after 2 or 3, possibly 4, depending on what research you want to use, the premium we pay for experience is not money well used either in general. Aids, classroom aids, other than for special needs students, other than for disabled students, classroom aids, we can't find any econometric contribution that they make to all of this. Not giving or paying 100% subsidy for special education and not is just a roadmap to asking that money not be well used, and we could go on and on. My last slide before turning to people who actually have to do things is that there's a set of things you could do in our school districts and our states. There's a set of things you can do more wisely than we do now. The present accounting system really does not enable one school district to know how its money is used. We use these object codes. All we know is we spend for people, sort of not people. We don't really know what the people do. In business, there's what's called activity-based cost accounting, toward which we really need to move in education so that we have a better sense of what the money's going for. If I ask superintendents, well, how much do you spend on teaching math at the 4th grade. They have no idea. Or teaching reading at the 3rd grade. They have no idea. But with an activity-based cost accounting system, we could come closer to knowing what we're now spending, and then we can join that with achievement scores, and that gives us a sense of where the effectiveness is in a system. Paying for results instead of paying for just having students in seats, getting rid of seat time makes sense. One little tiny example. If about 50% at least in most states, 50% of our high school graduates who then attend college are responsible for the taking of remedial or developmental courses at their community college or wherever they matriculate. Those remedial courses are expensive that they have to take. Why not charge those back to the school district from which they graduated? Then I suspect the school district would pay more attention to what they're doing. Capitating, which is an ugly word, sounds like decapitating or something, but over the last 25 years, school district budgets have grown from about 10% on disabled children, on special needs children, to today about 21 cents out of every school dollar nationwide is spent on disabled children. It's grown greatly. And again, and these are cases where your heart bleeds and you would like to spend a never-ending amount on them. But one way in which to force the system toward greater efficiency is to pay a school district for a certain percentage. Usually it's about 12%, maximally 13% of students are high incident but low cost disabled features. And by capitating that and paying districts a fixed amount, then they spend their money more wisely. There are low incident, high cost students who are that's another arrangement. And usually by having the state pick up those costs, it's the best way to travel. I could go on, but I'd rather that my practically oriented colleagues up here have an opportunity to contribute that which is of interest to them. These are two unusual individuals, but good. But good. Senator Don Gaetz from Florida, if I remember correct, of course, the nice thing about the program is it describes people accurately. But Senator, if I remember correctly, you were a superintendent in Florida, and now for, I think since 2006, but at least 5 or 6 years, a state senator, deeply engaged in education. And Hanna Skandera, having worked in the U.S. Department of Education, now takes on the enormous challenge of running education for a whole state, New Mexico. Hanna, your turn.
Thank you, Jim. And since we're the practical folks at the table, I just would take issue with one thing you said, maybe a couple, and that is the implication that the K-12 arena should take on the cost of the remediation cost, which in New Mexico is about $27 million annually. And I would go back to your higher ed days and say, what about higher ed taking on the cost of bringing teachers to bear that are not quite prepared? So. Having said that, I was thinking.
Let's not make the assumption that ed school should train teachers.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. I will say I'm excited to be here today, and I'm not sure if your PowerPoint was supposed to bring some optimism to the room. It didn't for me. But hopefully, I will say by the end of this conversation, I have a great deal of optimism, because at the end of the day, probably every state across this nation is experiencing a crunch, and that might be a nice way of putting it, but it's an opportunity in my view, and I think in the state of New Mexico, we are seizing that opportunity, not without great challenges and some tough times, but the opportunity's there, and I'd love to talk a little bit about that. Jim, you talked about 10 illustrations of using our money more wisely. I will pull back and say, plenty of research tells us money is not the driver for change in education. But I do think, and I think Jim said this and said it well, it matters. And so how we spend what we have is our greatest opportunity in some ways. In New Mexico, we've said there are not any silver bullets in education, but there are key strategic levers for change. And if you think about those, many of them, actually Jim talked about effective teachers and school leaders, ensuring our kids can read no later than the 3rd grade and that they're ready and prepared for success, ensuring that we have a differentiated accountability system that acknowledges progress and growth so that we can champion what's working and acknowledge where we're failing in a more clear way than we have been able to date through No Child Left Behind. I'm excited New Mexico will be pursuing a waiver for differentiated accountability. And then finally, asking ourselves, how do we get a better return on our investment? And I'm going to paint a little bit of a bleak picture for a minute and then talk about why I believe and I'm very optimistic about what is taking place in New Mexico and what lies ahead. And I have been known to say, and I'll say it again to Governor Bush and folks from Florida, Senator, I respect and appreciate all the student achievement gains that have occurred there, but New Mexico's coming, so get ready. And we have a lot of room for improvement, so that means we'll close the gap more quickly. Right now in New Mexico, we are often ranked near the bottom, if you will, when it comes to student achievement. We looked at 4th grade reading scores through NAEP. We, within the last few years, were ranked 49th. In graduation ranks, given a similar ranking. So when it comes to student achievement, we have an opportunity ahead of us. But we are seizing the moment, and in particular, I want to focus in on the strategic lever for change that I talked about when it comes to return on investment, and talk about some of the things that are taking place right now as we speak, and they really are a result of, when the crunch is there, you have to ask the tough questions. What is working, what's not, and can we use what we have in a more efficient and effective way? A quick look at, we did take about a 1.5% cut to our education budgets this last year. I'll say as a side note, the Public Education Department, which I have the privilege of serving and leading, we took a 25% budget cut. So a hefty opportunity to ask, how do we do what we do better with less? In our school districts, this is the 3rd year on top of cuts to our school districts, so they also have had that challenge. So to take a look at some of the policies and what exists now and where we're headed, to give you a picture of what I see as some possible opportunities when it comes to state policy and really asking tough questions, but then implementing something that might give us that opportunity to see it through. Before I came on board, there was already in place in New Mexico a statute that required the Secretary for Education to review every single district and charter school budget. And at the time, and that happens every year, and it's been implemented in such a way that the questions were about fiscal solvency. Again, are you in the black? How you doing with getting in the black? How are we going to get in the black? And so a good, rigorous process around good fiscal practices. This last legislative session, the legislature, and I want to take a minute and honor Senator Sapien, one of our legislators is here today, and he is a part of the effort in our state to bring education reform in a meaningful way. So we're glad he's here, and look forward to working together to create some of the change I talked about when it comes to student achievement. Having said that, the legislature, this last legislative session, put into the actual budget bill language the expectation that the Secretary not only would review budgets, but work with superintendents and school boards to ensure that we are investing in proven practices. So relatively general, but a nod to, wait a minute, we have an expectation about our investment. And I should pull back and say, and I'm not sure this is real different across the nation, we spend 42% of our entire state budget on K-12, 48% when you add higher education in, so it's an investment. And the basic premise I have, and I believe many across our state have, is that we can get a better return. We currently, for just a perspective again, spend a little bit over, according to the National Education Association, between state and federal funding, we spend a little bit over $11,000 per student. which puts us about ahead of about 29 other states when it comes to expenditures. So what I say is we're mid-pack when it comes to what we're investing per pupil in our students. I mentioned our student achievement, and so you could say that we're mid-pack in investment at the bottom when it comes to our return for our kids. So I mentioned the budget bill. On top of that budget bill, though, we also passed a differentiated accountability system called school grades. Many of you are familiar with the school grading principles that have been applied in many states across this nation. In our school grading bill and the legislative language in that, we also included that when, and the basic concept behind the school grading, just for a quick snapshot, is that we know that not all our schools are failing, and not all of them are at the highest success levels that we would expect. We want to differentiate and be able to hold ourselves accountable for not just how many students are on grade level, but how many are making progress. So in that, there will be some rock star schools that are A's, some that are B's, C's being an average, and then D and F where it's a clarion call for what are we going to do differently. We're not seeing the growth and the progress we expect for our kids, and we're not seeing the kids on grade level that we would expect. So the expectation in the school grading law said that when a school is a D or F school, that the Secretary for Education in the budget review process will ensure that in those schools the expenditures are spent on proven strategies for student success. And the language I just would mention is much stronger, if you will, than the budget language. The budget language is a broad, we expect a better return on our investment when you're reviewing budgets, let's make sure we get there. But this language around accountability for our schools basically says when we're failing our kids, let's not keep investing in the same failure year after year. Let's begin to ask ourselves, is there a better investment? Is there a better reading program? Are we recruiting the best and the brightest when it comes to our teachers and our school leaders? And so we are excited about this possibility, believe that it is going to give us an opportunity to work with superintendents and school boards across our state. And obviously, I'm an optimist. I'm sure there'll be some moments of when I say work with, working often, implies there will be moments of challenge and differing views, et cetera. But I believe that as we begin to look at education reform, we are remiss if we do not begin to hold ourselves accountable for the investment we make today. So often we say, it's all about how much more or how much less, instead of what do we have. And I will tell you that, and I don't think we're an exception, it is easy to begin to say, well, when we have more money, we will. And shame on us if that's our answer, because every day that goes by in New Mexico, we lose 71 children a day to dropouts, et cetera. So, and for perspective, we have 330,000 students across the K-12 arena, so 71 students is a big number in the scope of things. So to say we'll wait till we have more to ensure that our kids are ready for success in college career is, to me, a mandate on the adults to ask a fundamental question of, so who's deciding which kids lose in the meantime? So in this budget review process, as I mentioned, we have provided the opportunity to really ask the tough questions, and we are in the process right now of developing key questions linked to our strategic levers and priorities around reading, college and career readiness, teacher effectiveness, et cetera, to ask how are our investments and our budgets today producing a return for our students today and in the future. And I'm excited about that. I will also tell you, we have actually just applied, and I just wanted to lay out, I hope it's helpful, some ideas of things that, how do you get at this issue in a kind of a practical way. And so right now we are applying for a grant that would allow us to put forward a clearinghouse and literally take proven strategies for student success across the state of New Mexico, get the data, post them in a clearinghouse, so that as we say, you know what, you're not getting the return on investment you want and we expect for our kids in this state, here's some options. Here's some options for what is working, what's possible. So we're not dictating, hey, you have to use this program, you need to do it this way, but we're providing an opportunity for our districts and our superintendents and school boards to choose from proven strategies across the arena, whether it's science, math, reading, etc., from their colleagues. And we are also putting in some monies for our school leaders in these successful schools that have proven strategies that are working to mentor those schools that are really struggling in developing and implementing proven strategies. So as a practical matter, I think one way we get at this return on investment is to stop talking about less and more and start asking, what do we have today and what are we getting for that return? And in New Mexico, the answer is not enough. And I think our governor, our legislature, and the state has said not enough. And so when I say I have a great deal of optimism, I say that because it takes a state saying we believe something more for our kids. And I think in New Mexico we're seeing that, and it's starting, and it really was, the seed of this comes from a budget crunch. And going, all right, we are where we are, what can we do with what we have? And so as you look and think about possibilities and policies, I think a key lever for change is beginning to ask the question, not how much more or how much less, but with what we have, what can we do, and how do we direct and lead in a way that's meaningful so that folks can have choices for proven strategies for success. So.
We go from one sunshine state to another.
But we have better oranges.
You have oranges.
We have oranges.
Got chili.
That's true, you have better chili. But we're coming up in chili. First, let me say that I feel very privileged to be on this panel. Dr. Guthrie has been distinguished professor in all the colleges I couldn't get into. And Secretary-Designate Skandera, has an extraordinary career in education reform, and she's a Secretary-Designate, and I'm a President-Designate. Somebody was looking at our cards and said, what does that mean? What it means is there's still a chance we won't get the job. That's what it means. And I have members of the Florida Senate who are here monitoring me today to decide whether or not at the end of the day they're going to vote for me. But I'm sure you'll be confirmed. No problem at all. When I was thinking about the topic for today, which is, how do you use a crisis? How do you make sure that a crisis doesn't go to waste? I was thinking about when I was first elected as the superintendent of schools, and I'm not an educator. I was a business guy in my community, a school system that was tanking, finances were going south. Academic progress was regression. We had dropped to 27th out of 67 school districts in the state, but we still had the myth of Lake Wobegon that all the children were above average. So I was a business guy and wound up running for superintendent of schools. My daughter always corrects me. She said, Dad, you really weren't a superintendent. You just played one on TV. And that's true. But the first day that I showed up at the district office after winning the superintendency, and of course, you could imagine that the education establishment was not anxious to welcome me. So I showed up, and the outgoing superintendent kept me waiting for 40 minutes so that I could just have a polite conversation with him. And to mark time, I walked up to the lady who was the receptionist there, and it looked like she'd been the receptionist for a long time. And I said, Miss Taylor, how many people work in this building? She said, about half. So I fired the other half. I made use of a crisis, and the crisis was that I'd been elected. And the education establishment in my community, in my county, a 30,000 student school district, a county-wide school district, I probably didn't get a single vote inside that building. And they viewed it as a crisis that I was becoming superintendent. And so things were terrible, and there was blood in the water. And so why not use that opportunity, as my father used to say, if you got to pay the piper, son, dance. And so we used that opportunity to cut the district office overhead in half, to reduce dramatically administrative overhead in our schools, and to put that money into second chance scholarships so that children who were struggling, who couldn't make it, and by the way, while the Florida legislature ended social promotion in the 3rd grade, we, in our district in Florida, ended social promotion in K through 12 all at once, and we went to cold turkey. And so when that happened, of course, our State Department of Education said, you can't do that, it's beyond the law, and they sent people over there to sort of coddle the parents, and I said, well, the only people who can relieve me of my responsibilities are the voters of Okaloosa County and Jeb Bush. And I called the governor, and he said, you do what's right, I'll take care of DOE. And he did. But we used the money to give every child who had been retained an opportunity for a second chance scholarship. We said inside the school, we'll change, just as Secretary Skandera said, we'll customize education, just as the governor said this morning. We'll customize education. It will give you something different. You're not going to get the same drill with the same teacher that didn't work last year. We'll customize education, but in return for you sticking with us on this, and you can imagine how many parents were madder than hell at the new superintendent. What we'll do is we'll take that money we saved by cutting administrative overhead and slashing the district office. We'll create a $2,000 second chance fund, and you can use that money outside of the school day, outside of the school year, in order to get one-on-one tutoring for your child in the areas where he needs help. And they said, well, that's fine, Gaetz, but obviously the school district's been lying to us for years because we got this grade sheet here that said B's and C's, and now you're telling us our kid can't read because he can't pass a standardized test, so we don't trust you. And I said, that's great. So we signed a contract with Kaplan, and students were able to go to a Kaplan Learning Center at a discount, use their $2,000, I'll use the term, voucher to buy one-on-one tutoring. And the first year, we had 82% of the students who had been retained the previous year earn their promotions on the basis of their own academic achievement. The second year, it was over 90%, and when I left office in 2006, it was 93%. 93% of students were able to earn their promotions on the basis of their own academic achievement, not on the basis of a sort of self-esteem, squishy sort of way of just promoting them and kicking them along to the next teacher in the next school, but providing real one-on-one tutoring and a customized education approach. That's one way we use the crisis of a school district being taken over by the barbarians in order to make student teaching or student learning better and provoke our teachers effectively. We did something else. When I became superintendent, I discovered that 1% of the dollars generated by students was controlled at schools, 1%. And 99% was controlled at the district office. Well, now how can you hold principals and teachers and parents and school advisory councils responsible when you don't give them the resources? So we turn it around. I come from the world of business. My background is in healthcare and developing and operating a national healthcare company, and we always lived on less than 10% overhead. And we figured anything less than that, we were robbing from patient care, robbing from our shareholders. And so what we did is we said, the school district will now live on 10% or less, and 90% of the money will be controlled at the school. We made school advisory councils into boards of directors, and we made principals into chief operating officers. We said you got to have an annual performance plan that deals with academic performance, financial stewardship, and customer relations. And you got to hit your numbers. And if you don't hit your numbers, you're fired. And so I got rid of half the principals in my district in the first 2 years. They didn't believe me. But we promoted other people. We took classroom teachers out of classrooms and said, you get it. We can teach you how to manage, but we can't teach them about the importance of education and effective teaching and getting real results. And we had something else too. We said if you couldn't get a 65% approval rating from your parents in a blind study that we did through a third party, you got fired because you got bad customer relations. So we balanced academic achievement according to a performance plan with financial management according to a business plan and being able to satisfy your customers. And that's how principals got to keep their job, and it's how they got promoted into other jobs, and it's how they got bonuses. I think that's a creative way to use a crisis. And let me mention a couple of other things. I'm not sure what it's like in your state, but in our state, in Florida, this last year we cut $3.8 billion in spending out of a $70 billion budget. It was the deepest cuts that anybody can remember, proportionately, in our state's history. And last week in Florida, we learned that this next year, in order to balance our budget without raising taxes and fees on our businesses and citizens, and by the way, we don't think in Florida that the way to recover is to have government get a bigger slice of a shrinking pie. And so in order to balance our budget, we're going to have to cut another $2.5 billion and retain all the current cuts. Now that's the crisis. And Hanna talked about the percentage spent on education in her state. In our state, about 28% of our budget is spent on K-12. So at least 28% of the cuts are going to have to come out of K-12 education. That's a slug of money. Now, my guess is that every state is facing, to a greater or lesser degree, the same set of facts. Less money coming in, but yet increasing needs. That sets up the crisis. Now, how do we make sure it doesn't go to waste? In Florida, we've made 1,000 mistakes. We really have. And probably the biggest mistake was term limits on governors. Otherwise, Jeb Bush could be governor for life. And we can make you all come to Florida. So, I'm not suggesting we've cracked the code. But let me give you 3 ideas, 3 initiatives that you can accept, that you can discard, that you can deburr, that you can say they're crazy in Florida as usual, but 3 initiatives that are producing reform results in Florida. And these are initiatives arising out of budgetary crises. Crises that force us, as Lincoln said, to think anew, to act anew, to disenthrall ourselves in order to save ourselves. The first is the one that the governor spoke of this morning, the substitution of virtual education, or digital learning, as some people call it, for traditional and more expensive classroom instruction. Of course, the real value of digital learning was expressed well by Governor Bush this morning. There's an extraordinary value in opening up a whole world to students and in allowing students to learn at a pace that allows them to complete sooner. But what's innovative from a budgetary perspective, and Julie Young, who's head of our Florida Virtual School, I think is here in the audience and is going to present today, from a budgetary perspective, in Florida, we pay for virtual education based on completion, not on cost, not on enrollment, and not on seat time. And our cost for 1 FTE of traditional classroom instruction, if you sort of level everybody out and say there's a typical Florida student, Hanna, we spend a lot less money than you do. It's about $6,800 right now in Florida. But our cost for the same student, the same FTE, using virtual education is $4,800. That's what we pay. And remember, we pay on completion, not on seat time. So that's $2,000 less, more than 20% less, and we only pay for completers. Now here's another fact. 78% of virtual learners complete their courses. So we're not paying for those who drop out, we're not paying for those who fail. And if you look at it strictly from a budgeteering perspective, if you got 78% completers, that's another 12% that the budgeteers can look at, because you're not paying for things, as the Secretary has said, that don't work. Now, obviously, there's a positive incentive at work with virtual education as well. As a superintendent of schools, Julie will remember, I bought every franchise she would sell me. I bought 82 course franchises from her. But here's how we paid our teachers. We paid our teachers who taught using Florida Virtual, or what we called Okaloosa Online after we bought the franchises and customized it to our area. We paid them based on completion. So we learned from the unions that it is about money. And so, while there are intrinsic rewards, there are extrinsic rewards that work if you pay based on completion. So teachers spent more time with students. Teachers were more interested in helping a struggling student succeed. Teachers were more interested in customizing what they did even in a virtual environment, when they knew that if the student completed and passed the end of course exam, that's when the teacher got paid. It's an interesting idea. And we certainly haven't cracked the code. I'm sure Julie will tell you that we have a lot more to do. We need to make our end of course exams and virtual education more rigorous. But I will tell you that it is one way to make use of a budgetary crisis to cut the cost of student instruction and to combine that with paying for results, not paying for seat time. The second suggestion from Florida is what we call the Career and Professional Education Act, or CAPE. And I think you all got copies of it, or ought to be able to get copies of it. Is that right, Mandy? Did we do that?
We can.
We can? Okay, we can. We will. Here's what it is. It's a bill that I sponsored. Senator Lynn, who is chairman of our Education Appropriations Committee in the Florida Senate, is here today. She was very helpful in making sure that the bill was a better bill, which is legislative talk for she beat me down on my mistakes. And under this legislation, the CAPE legislation, Career and Professional Education Act, every school district in Florida has to offer a career technical institute or academy that allows students to earn, and this is the most important part, because it ain't your grandfather's VOTEC, to allow them to earn national industry certifications in high demand job areas identified not by the school district based on, we gotta let old Billy teach it because God knows he can't teach anything else, but rather having the business community identify and our state workforce agency affirm that those are the areas in which we need to have highly skilled workers. I can tell you that the new CAPE law sets up this system. Curriculum is established by industry, not by the school district. Teachers come either from industry or they are credentialed by industry, not by the school district. So we actually have this interesting phenomenon of teachers being able to pass the courses they teach. Industry creates the assessment of skills in our CAPE institutes. Industry, not the school district, decides who is awarded these national industry certifications. And the certifications are national. They're defined and recognized by industry. They're not home-cooked by school districts. In Florida, CAPE does take the place of your grandfather's VOTEC. And whereas virtual education reimbursement is in effect a stick, if you don't complete, you don't get paid, CAPE is a carrot and a stick. School districts under our funding formula, which Dr. Guthrie developed years ago and which we're trying to refine now as a tool for inducing change, under our funding formula under the CAPE Act, school districts can earn 30% more if students earn national industry certifications. Now, this isn't, like a cherry bowl. What it means is that a student may have to take one course or two courses or three courses to earn an advanced Cisco certification. But once they earn it, then the school district gets a bump of a 0.3 on the funding, or an additional, additional 30%. So, districts disinclined or disinterested in establishing a robust and academically rigorous career education program now see if they follow the law, there are financial rewards. Here are the results of CAPE after 2 years. First, 50,347 national certifications were awarded by 81 targeted industries, ranging from FAA flight school to Autodesk to Adobe to Cisco to all kinds of other things. We'd be happy to provide you information. Enrollment in these rigorous career courses is on a steep incline. Sometime this school year, the 100,000th national industry certification will be awarded to a Florida high school student, Senator Lynn, and that will be tribute to your helping us get that bill passed. And rigor is revealed by the fact that 62% of students pass and get the certifications on a third-party administered basis. What that means is not everybody gets there. But if you don't get there, then the school district and the school don't get the kicker in terms of additional funding. In our state, those national certifications also result, and here's another budgetary implication, in college credits. 75% of those certifications awarded in the first 2 years of CAPE are formally accredited and articulated for college credit in Florida's college system. In other words, you enroll, you present your certificate, and you get the college credit at no additional charge. So that's millions of dollars in additional value to parents and students. Plus, 75% of the CAPE certifications are in science, technology, engineering, and math areas, and that becomes important in my last point. The market value of these certifications in the real economy now exceeds $40 million after 2 years if you would have to go out and get those certifications at a technical school, and the value will close on $100 million in the 4th year. So there's a novel idea. Public education feeding the economy instead of feeding off of the economy. Now, our third Florida offering is one that we haven't finished yet. In fact, we're just getting started with. So you can watch us struggle and learn from our mistakes. It is lashing higher education to the realities of the economy. And it builds off of the digital learning initiatives that we've had and also our CAPE academies. Here's the crisis, which your state, to a greater or lesser extent, might share. In the next 10 years in Florida, I suspect it's probably the same in many of your states. In the next 10 years in Florida, 60% of the growth jobs will be in areas requiring science, technology, engineering, and math skills. But right now, our state university systems, baccalaureate degrees, as they report them this month, 17% touch the areas of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So our higher education system, which we're very proud of in Florida, we would simply suggest we've got some work to do because there's an apparent disconnect between what the market is demanding and what we're producing. Now, this isn't about making higher education a slave to business. What this is making sure that when your sons and your daughters and the people you love and care about cross the graduation stage and get a college degree, that it means that they're going to get a job in the real economy. There's a myth right now. And the myth is that if you get a college degree, you get a job, you get a house with a white picket fence and 2.5 kids. The fact is, I heard this on NPR, so it has to be true. The fact is that last year only 20% of university graduates in the United States got jobs in their major or minor fields of study. So what we have to do is link what we're doing in higher education with the demands of the economy. Now, here are a couple of things that we're considering. Watch us struggle. Changing the funding formula for universities and colleges from seat time to completion. You can see the ivy shaking right now. Since 60% of our higher education budgets in Florida are legislative appropriations, we're considering paying more for the degrees and job placements that work in the marketplace for graduates and paying less for those that don't. We're considering allowing universities to differentiate tuition, charging students less for courses that lead to degrees that result in real jobs, and charging students more for intellectually interesting degrees, which sadly there's no market value for. My undergraduate degree is in religion and political science. Now, talk about worthless. Talk about bipolar. Our state-funded scholarship program for bright and deserving students is called the Bright Future Scholarship. But we carve out 35% of that, and the 35% equates to about $40 million for need-based awards. Now, here's where we're starting to chip some rice bowls. We are considering switching from need-based awards to completion bonuses payable to the student to reduce their debt, the crushing debt that these kids are coming out of college with, to reducing their debt or giving them a chance to have a little nest egg to start a business. If you complete, you get paid. We're considering changing our payments to research professors to, instead of paying them for whatever it is they do, to pay for patents. That's valuable. To pay for the commercialization of research in our state, and that's valuable. We're considering paying for graduation rates, the higher the better, the more, and paying for job placement, again, instead of seat time. And we're considering stopping providing financial aid and state support after a full-time student has been enrolled in college for 5 years. It ought to end at some point. So I would only say that this economic security scorecard that we're looking at is one that maybe there's an opportunity for all of us to learn from. I end with sort of a quick personal story. When I was elected superintendent, my children, knowing that the school district was virtually bankrupt, and that we were in all these terrible problems, they gave me a copy of Washington's Valley Forge diaries as a way that I could sort of gain inspiration. And I was thumbing through it, and there's one entry, and it was the entry that was made when Congress refused to provide any more money. There was no more uniforms, there was no food, there really were bloody footprints in the snow. And Washington wrote in his diary one night, "We have no more money, so now we must think." And for 2 days, he struggled to develop a plan which all of his generals, except one, a bookseller named Knox, a businessman, agreed to. All the other generals said it'd never work. But he took all that he had left. He risked everything. He crossed an icy river and surprised the Hessians on Christmas morning. And before that time, the course of the Revolutionary War had always gone against the rebels. And after that day, the course of the Revolutionary War went forward to victory. Theodore Roosevelt says that reform without power is empty, and power without reform is corruption. Jeb Bush says that success is never final and reform is never finished. But if we work together on these and other specific tasks, I believe that we'll have better jobs, better communities, a better economy, and we'll have better schools. Thank you.
Two terrific presentations. Thank you both. One question to each, and then we're going to save about 20 minutes, about 15 minutes here for any comments or questions from those in the audience. Secretary Skandera, you mentioned this state budget review process. Could you give us a little inkling about how this works? How many districts are there in New Mexico? Do they come in and sit down with you or with Silas Marner or who? How's it work?
So we currently have 89 school districts and 84 charter schools, and that number's growing. And what this looks like, we have a period legislatively defined, beginning, I believe, on I want to say April 15th. And and they have to be completed and finished by the end of June 30th. And we literally schedule, and there's a lot of thought process that goes into the scheduling of every single district and charter school. Some of these meetings are done in person, and we have program and our instructional side of the house and our fiscal side present with specific questions that have already been sent to our districts to answer and be prepared to talk about how their budget supports their instructional goals, etc. So it's a very specific, very defined process, and we continue to refine it based on what we learned. This is the first year that we really beefed up what I would call the instructional queries and questions and the investment in, if you will, the instructional side versus more of the fiscal solvency. We'll continue to get more focused and provide more direction so that when our districts come sit down, and often it's not just the superintendent, it at times is the majority of a school board, since they are very much involved in the budgeting process, and it can be several hours. And at times it's a back and forth and come back, etc. So we have budget analysts that work and are assigned. We literally divide up districts by budget analysts, and they work in advance and they work in follow-up. And certainly, in all candor, this is probably a no-brainer, but there are districts with much more sophisticated fiscal and instructional strategies, and so bridging that and working with those who might be struggling. We have districts 30 students strong, so very small districts. So some of our smaller districts need more assistance in just basic budget development, etc., whereas some of our larger districts have more more folks to pull from, to develop. So it's a iterative process, and we do continue to refine it, knowing and seeing what we're learning. This will be the first year that we're really looking to point to proven strategies and say, hey, if you're not getting the return on investment, here's some things you can look at that you might be able to choose from. So we're mid-stride, really, and learning. I mean, to the Senator's point about watch and learn, we are learning in this process, but I do believe it is a real opportunity to partner with our districts to ask the tough questions and then come out with an expectation for our investment that we have not had to date.
Hanna, let me follow up I want to be expeditious with regard to time, but how did the teacher leaders take this review process?
So Senator Gaetz talked a little bit about his invitation into his foray as a superintendent, and I certainly have had great opportunities in our state to engage in meaningful dialogue, and at whether it's with superintendents, school boards, or teacher leaders across our state, and probably will continue to. Change is hard, and no one likes to hear we don't have any more money. I mean, let's just get down and dirty for a second. That is not a fun message to deliver. In fact, when you talk about cuts, it's even more fun. So it's not a welcome message at the front end, but as you kind of get to we are where we are, what are we going to do about it? I believe we're getting to make great strides in regards to engaging in a meaningful way. Is it easy? No. Are you loved? Absolutely not. Is there a chance at the end of the day, and this is where my optimism is, and believes that when folks begin to kind of round that curve and go, all right, we are where we are, what are we going to do about it? And say, we can either own this or we can distance, but when we distance our kids. And so that's been the good opportunity for us.
Well, thank you. Senator, you gave us a riveting recounting of being both a superintendent and then being a state senator and things you've done at both levels. Reflecting on being superintendent, and I heard a lot of decentralization in your effort. I mean, then when you left as superintendent, how much of that reverted to what had previously existed?
That's kind of like asking Governor Bush how things are in Florida now. Things are better than they were a year ago or two. I would say that my successor is an extraordinary educator. She does well, but she grew up in the education establishment. And so some of these awkward things that we put in place, and I was superintendent for 6 years. I was reelected without opposition. And then they promised me that if I would leave the county and go to the state senate, that they would elect me. And they kept their promise, and I kept mine. But I would say that many of the very specific reforms we put in place have been watered down to some extent. They've not necessarily been made worse, but they've been made different. The academic profile of the county is still strong, although it's no longer the highest performing district in the state, which is where we left it. But my successor is someone who has grown up in the education establishment, and I think is less inclined to take on the fights, because these are people who she spent 30 years with. I didn't need the job, I didn't want the job, and so I had a little bit more freedom. And I think that's one of the things that superintendents and principals, school board members really have to come to grips with, and that is if you become one of them and you're not one of us, you're compromised a little bit. That's why I believe in term limits for state senators even, and I believe in term limits for school board members and superintendents, because after a while you become one of them. And so if you are supporting, helping, encouraging, advocating for educational reform in your states and in your communities, stand next to that superintendent or that school board member or that state superintendent or state commissioner, state secretary, who's done like Hanna Skandera and stepped out on the ledge. Stand next to that person and let them know that you will be there for them and you will support them. You'll be there in the breach, because otherwise it is easy for people who've been in education forever to sink back into the way we've always done it.
Well, thank you, Senator. I certainly concur. concur with your observations. Now we have a chance for those of you who would like either to ask a question of our panelists, or perhaps you have an observation, and there is a microphone. If you'll raise your hand, we'll be able to capture that which you have to say.
And the three of us have all been in elementary school rezoning hearings, so nothing you say to us is going to be nearly as offensive as to what we've already heard.
Here's a hand up here.
You hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
My name's Lee Templer. I'm with the Goldwater Institute out of Phoenix. During the day, I work at a public policy organization. One night a week, I teach at a community college. And so I'm intrigued by the notion of pay for completion versus pay for seat time. But I'm curious about how do you prevent fraud? I could easily just pass all my students. And there's not a lot of check to prevent me from doing that now in my particular college. It's my integrity that insists on them actually learning material before I give them a passing grade. So I'm just curious if you talk about how you prevent fraud and making sure that you're achieving something you're not passing.
I think we appreciate your asking that, and as Governor Bush said in his opening remarks this morning, we have to, both expectations and the measurement of progress are both important to us. And most of these paying for outcomes instead of paying for seat time arrangements have some objective or third-party measure. But Senator and Secretary, why don't you each comment?
Madam Secretary.
I will say, in a previous life, I helped develop a dual credit program where we partnered with higher ed institutions virtually, and and it was a pay upon completion. And we had end of course exams, and also we're beginning to explore third-party review and actual grading of those end of course exams. So you had an outside party and verification that a student actually did know, et cetera, et cetera. So, and with technology and the sophistication that's coming around this arena, I think we'll see more and more ways to get at this issue of how do we ensure that our kids know what we hope they know, so that we can transition to completion as an expectation.
I would agree with all of that and say if it isn't a third-party validated examination, then, you know, as Ronald Reagan would say, we trust you, but we really need to verify this. The other thing is that I believe the War of 1812 probably had the same causes and consequences in New Mexico as it did in Florida. So we need to take Governor Bush's admonition seriously today, and that is we need to have national standards and then assess against national standards. So I would say it has to be third party, but we ought to avoid home cooking in Florida and home cooking everywhere else. And we ought to subject ourselves to the higher standards that New Mexico and the other states will articulate, and make sure that our students can live up to that. We need to do better, and that's a vulnerability. We need to do better in virtual education in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Senator Jane Cunningham from Missouri. Senator Gaetz, on your idea with the CAPE, the vocational portion of it, that the industry determined the curriculum and taught it, how did you get around that with certification? Do you have like American Board certification, or how did you get those in the classrooms? Okay, and secondly, I'd really like the PowerPoints, or how we can get the PowerPoints as well as your ideas. I could not write fast enough to get all your ideas, Senator
That was
Gaetz,
the
if
plan.
we could get those.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, the certifications, if they would have come from school districts or even from the state of Florida, would have turned to Confederate money pretty fast. In our own hands, we would have watered them down. The FAA administered the examinations and awarded the certification. That's how we kept it from becoming home cooking.
I'll just a side note on that, as a potential bridge, and as you build your business community relationships as well, there are nationally certified vocational education programs today, and in fact, I mentioned our school grading bill, we actually give points for our students who complete the nationally certified, not the home cooked, but the nationally certified and graduation. And so you could potentially create a bridge in that regard and look at the nationally certified as you build the
and if I could just add that our state workforce agency is the keeper of the Holy Grail. They're the ones that say, here are the certifications that work in Florida's economy and work in that regional economy. So it's, again, it's not me as a local superintendent saying, let's do certifications in canister valves because my brother-in-law can teach that. Barely read, but he can teach that.
Among the biggest surprises is that you need meteorologists in Florida. I didn't realize that. Yes, sir.
We export them to New Mexico.
We send them right back.
Good morning. My name is Bob Barrett. I'm a state representative from Minnesota. And I want to bring up a situation I've recently come across in Minnesota and see if you all have had similar experiences. We have open enrollment in Minnesota. We also have charter schools. And our inner city schools get, so the question I have is more directed towards funding. Minneapolis-St. Paul, the inner city schools get about $14,000 per child. And the school districts I represent get about $8,000, $8,500. I recently come across some information that 30% of the parents that live in Minneapolis open enroll their kids out of the Minneapolis school district. So they're kind of turning their back on all this funding for other school districts. And if you look at the top 10 districts, they're open enrolling too. And these are all open enrolling to public schools. If you added in private schools, that 30% would be a lot higher. So they're open enrolling to districts that get between 13 and 33% less money per student than the one they're leaving, which I find shocking, and to me it proves that money does not buy quality education. So I'm trying to communicate that as much as I possibly can from a political point of view, but also to communicate why funding isn't the answer. Have you come across that situation, and how can you help me communicate that message to people who don't know?
So as you put it forward nicely, you're actually going to the politics of this more than the technicalities of this.
Well, I think we all agree that more money doesn't fund
Yeah.
better education, but a lot of people don't know. So then, therefore, and they don't, and the unions and so forth might know, but they don't. They have other issues and responsibilities. So that's where the politics gets involved in trying to communicate that to the right people. So we
Well,
can
let's
get a
have
momentum.
thank you, and let's have a quick comment from each of our other panelists, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. But Hannah, go ahead.
So, in some ways, to me, you're asking the age-old question of, and I would say this is, in education, probably one of, when I think about the stakeholders in the ground, so to speak, that are very difficult to move, this is one of them. And I do think it's a constant, and some of this is bringing about the data and sharing that and saying, look, I mean, you've got good data right there that tells the story, and some of it is recognizing that this is a perseverance opportunity, because I don't think that presupposition changes overnight, but I do think you can bring data to bear to end the conversation.
One thought, and that is that maybe the money ought to follow the student. The reason, and here's the funding formula expert here, but the reason that that one student gets more than another in our state, and correct me if I'm wrong, doctor, is because that student presents with a more complicated set of issues. Maybe they don't speak English as a first language. Maybe they're gifted, or maybe they're disabled, or maybe they have certain descriptors, and it has to do with where they live too. And so perhaps one answer, Representative, would be legislation that would say if your child is worth $14,000 in Minnesota state funding formula and chooses to go to another county or another school or another school district, he takes that money or she takes that money with her or with him to that school district through interlocal agreements to allow that sort of interlocal agreement to occur. With open enrollment, you've got a perfect environment to try it. Now, I grant you the politics are going to be thick, but when the money walks, then there's all kinds of, as the Secretary says, all kinds of illustration of the real problem.
Well, Senator, the few states have the advanced school finance systems that Florida do, and Minnesota has a far greater variation in local contribution than you permit, and that's one of the problems he's encountering.